Online dating can be exciting, but what if your perfect match is hiding a terrifying secret? Imagine meeting someone who seems charming online, only to realize they're nothing like their profile. They have a dark agenda. From shocking catfish encounters to dates that turn deadly, these real-life horror stories will make you question every swipe. Stay alert. Let's begin. I never thought I'd see those eyes again. Those dark, soulless eyes that haunted my nightmares for 3 years. But there they were, staring back at me from my phone screen on a casual Tuesday evening. One innocent swipe on Tinder, and suddenly, my whole world came crashing down. My hands trembled as I dropped my phone, memories flooding back of the hell I'd endured. The bruises had faded, but the mental scars remained fresh. How could he be here? Just 3 weeks ago, he was behind bars, where he belonged, where he was supposed to stay. But now, there he was, smiling in his profile picture, looking for his next victim. The same smile he used to give me before the rage would take over. I want to tell you my story, not just as a warning, but as a desperate plea for change. Because while I survived to tell this tale, the next person who swipes right on his profile might not be so lucky. They say love is blind, but sometimes it's just willfully ignorant. When I first met Mark on Tinder 2 years ago, all I saw was charm and potential. His profile was perfect: successful businessman, animal lover, family-oriented. Our first date felt like a fairy tale. He was attentive, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. The red flags were there, subtle at first: the possessive texts, the unexpected visits to my workplace, the slight controlling behavior. But I brushed them off as signs of care and affection. That's what we do, isn't it? We see what we want to see. I ignored my friend's concerns, defended his increasingly erratic behavior, and slowly isolated myself from everyone who tried to warn me. Looking back now, I realize how methodically he groomed me, how carefully he constructed the prison that would eventually become my life. The transformation from Prince Charming to monster wasn't overnight. It was gradual, like watching a beautiful painting slowly decay. The first time he grabbed my arm too tightly, he cried afterward and promised it would never happen again. When he threw my phone against the wall for receiving a text from a male colleague, he bought me a new one the next day. The cycle of violence and remorse became my new normal. I became an expert at covering bruises with makeup, at explaining away the times I couldn't make it to family gatherings. I learned to walk on eggshells, to predict his moods, to become smaller and smaller until I barely recognized myself in the mirror. Each day, I lost another piece of who I was, replaced by fear and shame. The woman who once loved adventure and spontaneity now jumped at her own shadow. It happened on a rainy Sunday evening. I had been planning my escape for weeks, secretly squirreling away money, making copies of important documents, and reconnecting with my sister through a burner phone. But he found the phone. What followed was the worst night of my life. The neighbors finally called the police after hearing my screams. When the officers arrived, I was barely conscious, but I remember the look of horror on their faces. That night, as I lay in the hospital bed, something inside me snapped back into place. I pressed charges. I testified. I stood my ground even when his family tried to pressure me into dropping the case. The justice system, for once, worked as it should. He was sentenced to 3 years for domestic violence and assault. I thought it was over. I thought I was finally safe. 3 weeks ago, I got the notification I had been dreading. He was being released early for good behavior. My therapist suggested I delete all dating apps, change my routine, and stay vigilant. But I refused to let him control my life anymore. I kept my Tinder account, thinking the chances of seeing him were minimal in a city this size. Then last night, there he was. New photos, new bio, same predator. My blood ran cold as I read his profile. Looking for a fresh start with someone special. I knew what that meant. He was hunting again. The profile was detailed. He had clearly spent time crafting his image. Everything about it screamed trustworthy, just like it had when I first swiped right on him 2 years ago. I couldn't just swipe left and pretend I hadn't seen it. Other women needed to know the danger lurking behind that charming smile. I reported his profile to Tinder. But we all know how that usually goes. So I took screenshots, gathered my evidence, police reports, court documents, hospital records, and started reaching out to domestic violence advocacy groups. They helped me navigate the legal system once again, this time to get his profile removed from not just Tinder, but all dating apps. But the process is slow, and every minute his profile remains active is another minute someone else could fall into his trap. The thought keeps me awake at night. How many women might have already matched with him? How many are currently chatting with him, unaware of the darkness that lies ahead? This isn't just my story anymore. It's a wake-up call for everyone using dating apps. These platforms have become hunting grounds for predators who know exactly how to manipulate the system. They can create new profiles faster than their old ones can be taken down. They can lie about their past, their intentions, their very nature. And while I'm fighting to change this, to make these platforms safer, I need you to fight too. Check public records, trust your instincts, and never ignore the red flags. Don't let my story become your story. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is swiping right on a profile that looks perfect, unaware that they're about to enter their own nightmare. The bruises heal, but the fear never really goes away, and neither does the responsibility we have to protect each other. I wish I could forget that notification sound, that innocent little ping that would change my life forever. You have a match. My thumb hovered over his profile. James, 29, software engineer. Perfect smile, kind eyes, and a bio that made me laugh. After being single for 2 years, I thought the universe was finally throwing me a bone. I couldn't have known that single swipe right would spiral into the darkest nightmare of my life. What started as butterflies would turn into pure terror. And now, sitting here in this safe house, I'm finally ready to tell you my story. But I need to warn you, nothing about this tale has a happy ending. And the scariest part? It could happen to anyone. In fact, it could be happening to you right now, and you wouldn't even know it. Because the truth is, James wasn't just my match. He'd been watching me long before I ever opened that dating app. The signs were there from the beginning, but I was too blinded by his charm to see them. Like how he knew exactly which coffee shop to suggest for our first date, my regular spot, or how he ordered my usual drink before I arrived. At the time, I thought it was a lucky guess. Now I know it was just the first red flag in an ocean of warnings I chose to ignore. But let me start from the beginning, from that first message that seemed so innocent, yet would lead me down a path that would make me question everything I thought I knew about trust, love, and the darkness that can hide behind a perfect profile picture. The conversation flowed effortlessly. James was witty, intelligent, and seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. We texted for a week before agreeing to meet, and during that time he became a constant presence in my life. He'd send good morning texts that made me smile and goodnight messages that made me feel cared for. He remembered every little detail I mentioned, my favorite books, my childhood dreams, my fears. Looking back, I should have noticed how he sometimes referenced things I hadn't told him. Like when he mentioned my sister's wedding last summer, even though I'd never brought it up, or when he asked about my recent promotion at work, which I hadn't shared yet. But love makes you blind, doesn't it? Or maybe we just see what we want to see. Our first date was perfect, almost too perfect. He knew exactly which wines I preferred, which songs would make me light up, which topics would get me talking. The conversation never lulled, and the chemistry was electric. By the end of the night, I was already imagining a future with him. That's what makes this all so terrifying. How easily he played me, how perfectly he crafted himself to be exactly what I wanted. He wasn't just trying to impress me, he was becoming my perfect match through months of careful observation. Every like on my social media, every public post I'd made, every routine I'd established, he'd studied it all, creating a character he knew I couldn't resist. Things moved quickly after that first date. James wanted to see me every day, and I was flattered by his attention. But then the texts started becoming more frequent, more demanding. If I didn't respond within minutes, he'd send follow-up messages asking if everything was okay, He'd know when I was online on other platforms and question why I hadn't replied to him. At work, I'd receive photos of my favorite lunch spots with messages like, "Wish you were here," places I hadn't told him about. He'd comment on outfits I was wearing in real time, even though we hadn't planned to meet. "You look beautiful in that blue dress today." He'd text, and I'd freeze, realizing I hadn't posted any photos. The romantic gestures began to feel suffocating. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced with my favorite takeout, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. He knew my schedule better than I did, always appearing at precisely the right moment. When I mentioned these coincidences to my best friend, she suggested I was being paranoid. "He's just attentive," she said. "You're not used to someone caring this much." I wanted to believe her, but deep down, something felt wrong. The way he'd stare at me when he thought I wasn't looking, the slight edge in his voice when I mentioned male colleagues, the way he seemed to know everything about my life before I told him. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working late, alone in my office, when my phone buzzed. "You shouldn't work such long hours," James texted. "It's not safe." Minutes later, another message. "That red sweater looks nice on you." My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone I was working late. I hadn't posted anything online. I slowly turned toward the window, scanning the darkness outside. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving between the buildings across the street. I grabbed my things and ran to my car, hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my keys. As I drove home, my phone kept buzzing. "Why are you leaving? We could have had dinner together. You're taking the wrong route home. I don't like it when you try to avoid me." When I finally reached my apartment, I found a package at my door. Inside was a photo album filled with pictures of me at the grocery store, walking my dog, having coffee with friends. Some dated back months before we'd matched on the dating app. And on the last page, a handwritten note. "I've loved you for so long. We're meant to be together." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a possessive date. This was something far more sinister. I spent that night at a hotel, too terrified to stay in my own home. But James knew. Somehow, he always knew. "The Holiday Inn doesn't suit you," he texted at 3 a.m. "You belong at home, with me." I blocked his number, but the messages kept coming from new ones. I deleted my social media, but he found other ways to reach me. He sent emails to my work account, left notes on my car, and somehow managed to hack into my home security cameras. My life became a prison of fear. Every street lamp cast suspicious shadows. Every passing car could be him. Every stranger could be watching me for him. I went to the police, but they said they needed more evidence. My friends started receiving messages too. Childhood photos of me I'd never seen before. Details about my past that even I had forgotten. That's when I discovered the truth about James, or whatever his real name was. The software engineer profile was fake. The photos were stolen. Everything he'd told me was a lie. But his obsession? That was terrifyingly real. And the worst part? He wasn't working alone. Someone had been helping him. Someone close to me. Someone who had access to my entire life. It was my new apartment manager, the one who had started working there just 3 months before I met James. She had been making copies of my keys, giving him access to my mail, my home, my life. Security footage showed her letting him into my apartment multiple times while I was at work. She had installed hidden cameras, recorded my conversations, and shared everything with him. Their plan had been meticulous. She would help him learn everything about me, and he would play the role of the perfect match. But why? The answer made me sick. They were part of a larger network, targeting women through dating apps, learning their routines, their vulnerabilities, their secrets. Some victims were blackmailed, others robbed, and some simply disappeared. I was supposed to be next. The only reason I discovered the truth was because James had deviated from their usual pattern. He'd become truly obsessed, breaking their careful protocols because he couldn't stick to their timeline. His real messages, his unplanned appearances, those weren't part of the plan. And that's what saved my life. I'm sharing this story now because I need you to understand. The scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding in the dark. They're the ones hiding in plain sight, behind perfect profile pictures and charming messages. They're the ones who learn your habits, mirror your interests, and make you feel special, all while weaving a web of surveillance and control. The police finally took action when they discovered the network's scope. James and the apartment manager were arrested, but others are still out there. I've changed my name, moved cities, and started a new life, but I still check over my shoulder. I still flinch at notification sounds. I still wonder if someone is watching. Because the truth is, in this digital age, we're all vulnerable. We share our lives online, thinking we're connecting with others, but we might be giving predators the very tools they need to destroy us. So the next time you get a match, the next time someone seems too perfect, too attentive, too good to be true, remember my story. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who know exactly what you want to see. And maybe, just maybe, that knowledge will save your life like it saved mine. I couldn't move. My body felt like it was sinking, heavy, paralyzed by an invisible force. My eyes flickered open, but everything around me was blurred, the dim light of the room warping into strange, shifting shapes. My heart pounded. What was happening? I tried to remember how I got here, but my mind was foggy, as if someone had reached in and stolen pieces of my memory. Then I heard it, his voice, calm, steady, whispering in my ear. Just relax, Elizabeth. Let yourself drift. My breath hitched. That voice. It belonged to the man I had been seeing for a few weeks, Daniel. But why couldn't I move? Why couldn't I fight back? The last thing I remembered was him smiling over dinner, his fingers lightly tracing the rim of his wine glass as he spoke. He had asked me something odd, something about trust and surrender. My skin prickled as fragments of our conversation slithered back into my mind. I can help you let go of your fears, he said. Hypnosis is completely safe. I hadn't thought much of it then, but now, trapped in my own body, the horror of realization clawed at me. Something was very, very wrong. The room felt colder now, or maybe it was my body shutting down from sheer terror. My limbs refused to obey, my voice strangled in my throat. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to run, but I was frozen. Daniel's voice remained soft, eerily soothing. You trust me, don't you? His fingers brushed my cheek. I wanted to recoil, but I couldn't. A single tear slid down my temple, pooling in my ear. That's good, he murmured. You're doing so well. The room flickered again, my vision swimming between reality and something darker. I had to fight this, but how? The memory of his words returned to me. The way he had smiled assured me that hypnosis was harmless, just a method of relaxation. But this wasn't relaxation. This was control, and I was drowning in it. My mind screamed for escape, but my body wouldn't listen. Then, his tone shifted. Let's go deeper, he whispered, a sinister edge creeping into his voice. Panic surged through me. No, I couldn't let this happen. I needed to break free. My fingers twitched. A tiny movement, but it was something. Focus, fight, resist. If I could just move, if I could just wake up. A sharp sound shattered the silence. A knock at the door. My pulse leaped. Daniel stiffened beside me. His fingers, which had been ghosting along my temple, froze mid-motion. The knock came again, louder this time. Hope flared inside me. Someone was here. Someone could help me. I forced my mouth to move, tried to form words. Help. The sound that came out was barely a whisper, a breath lost in the air. Daniel's head snapped toward me, his expression twisting. Shh, he hissed. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing too hard. Stay still. The fear in my chest burned hotter, turning into something wild, something desperate. I forced every ounce of willpower into my body, pushing against the invisible chains that held me. My fingers curled, my muscles spasmed. I gasped, finally breaking through the paralysis. The knocking turned frantic now. Elizabeth? A voice called. A woman's voice. My neighbor. My salvation. I sucked in air, my chest heaving. Daniel swore under his breath. And then, everything snapped. I lunged, rolling off the bed and crashing onto the floor. Pain exploded through my limbs, but I didn't care. I was awake. I was moving. I was free. But he wasn't going to let me go so easily. Daniel was on me in an instant. His hands latched onto my arms, dragging me back toward him. "You're not supposed to wake up yet," he snarled. My nails clawed at the floor, desperate for traction. I kicked, twisted, anything to break free. The door shook as my neighbor pounded on it. "Elizabeth, open up!" The fight surged inside me, pure adrenaline igniting my veins. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice raw and broken. Daniel's hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my cries. Panic clawed up my throat. No, no, no. I wasn't going to let him win. With every ounce of strength I had left, I bit down on his palm. "Hard," he howled, jerking back. That was my chance. I scrambled forward, lunging toward the door. My fingers barely brushed the knob when a brutal yank sent me crashing onto the floor. My head hit the hardwood with a sickening crack. Stars exploded in my vision. I groaned, disoriented. Then sudden silence. I blinked, trying to focus. Daniel was gone. The room was empty. My chest heaved. Had I imagined it? No. The blood on my lips, the sting in my scalp, they were real. But where was he? The door creaked open. My neighbor stood there, her eyes wide with concern. "Elizabeth? What happened?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned, scanning the room. He was gone. The space where he had been standing just moments ago was empty. But that didn't make sense. There was nowhere to go. No windows, no exits besides the door. He had been here. I had felt his hands on me, his breath against my skin. My neighbor stepped closer, gripping my shoulders. "You're shaking," she said softly. "Come on, let's get you out of here." I let her guide me away, my body still trembling. We reached the hallway, and she shut the door behind us. "I heard screaming," she whispered. I came as fast as I could. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. But as we walked down the corridor, I risked one last glance at the door. And that's when I saw it, the faintest shadow moving behind the curtain. He was still there, watching. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt him. His voice, his touch. I knew he was gone, vanished without a trace. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he had left something behind. A part of him, inside me. I flinched at every sound, every flicker of movement in the corner of my vision. My neighbor stayed with me the first night, but she couldn't understand the fear consuming me. I barely understood it myself. Was I going mad? Or had Daniel done something worse than just hypnotize me? I couldn't escape the feeling that I was still under his control. That somewhere, somehow, he was still pulling the strings. I started locking my doors, covering my mirrors. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the whisper in the back of my mind. Let's go deeper. And the worst part? A tiny, treacherous part of me wanted to listen. It wasn't over. I woke one night to find my body frozen again, my limbs like lead. The room was silent, too silent. My breath came in short, ragged gasps as a chill ran down my spine. Then, in the darkness, I heard it, his voice. "Did you really think you could wake up?"